What is the best and worst move that the Sacramento Kings have made this offseason? And I'm going to share with you why I'm having a tough time supporting Kings general manager Monte McNair right now. It's all right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all offseason long. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer for ABC 10. And before you go clicking ahead in the video or clicking ahead or scrolling ahead in the audio podcast, understand that when it comes to that last part of that tease, my reason for not supporting or not being happy with Kings general manager Monte McNair right now, it's a fun, lighthearted reason based off of something that happened on Twitter today. So no need to overreact to it or go, oh my God, panic. Did he do something? What did he do? Did he say something wrong? Why is Matt mad at him? Blah, blah, blah. It's nothing that serious. So we'll get to that a little bit later on in the podcast. It's more meant to be kind of a fun little, if you know me and know things that I'm really interested in and things that I really care about and love to a point where it might be borderline weird or unhealthy. It'll make sense to you when I get to that later on in the podcast. It's just kind of a fun joke topic here in the middle of the slowest part of the off season. But the main meat and potatoes of this podcast today is going to be discussing the best move, in my opinion, and the worst move, in my opinion, that the Sacramento Kings have made so far this offseason. Now, of course, put an asterisk next to this. The offseason is not complete, although, as I've shared with you before, I'm fairly certain that we're going to not see any more major moves from the Sacramento Kings. They do still have a roster spot to use. I'm going to talk about maybe a potential target for the Kings to go out and get a target that just became available, a reunion of sorts here in Sacramento. I'll talk about that a little bit later on in the podcast. They also still have that two-way spot, and I'll mention, I've shared with you, I think Jordan Ford is one of the top candidates to get that two-way spot, certainly deserves to get a spot like that. So maybe he will get that spot. And I actually, it's topical to bring up Jordan Ford because he attracted the attention of a three-time All-NBA, or rather, three-time NBA Sixth Man of the Year. So we have tons to get to here in this fun offseason podcast. Let's begin with the best and worst move of this offseason, in my opinion, so far for the Kings. I'm going to start with some honorable mentions. Now, these are all positive honorable mentions. If you won't be surprised to essentially hear that it was hard for me to come up with a worst move. So all these honorable mentions are in the best move category, although maybe one or two of them you might think is in the worst move category. Maybe the Kings trading Richaun Holmes on draft night and also the rights to Omax Prosper on draft night. Maybe you'll think that's a worst move or a best move. It was a solid move because of how it set up the rest of the offseason. So that's an honorable mention for me. The Kings signing Sasha Vezenkov, and more specifically, the Kings doing what they needed to do to convince the EuroLeague MVP to leave a job not finished at Olympiacos as they were eliminated in the championship game in the EuroLeague, to say goodbye to that, leave that behind, and come to join the Sacramento Kings, where he'll be a role player on hopefully a team that's trying to, as Monty would say, open a championship window. That's an honorable mention. Both the Harrison Barnes and Trey Lyles contract extensions, or re-signing the two of them and bringing them back here to Sacramento. Those are both, I think, honorable mentions for really solid moves, the best moves that the Sacramento Kings have made this offseason, although I know many of you are not too happy or weren't happy necessarily at the time with the Kings choosing to bring Harrison Barnes back and, for the most part, essentially run this team back. But the best move that I came up with, the best move, in my opinion, that the Kings have made this offseason was the extension of Domantas Sabonis. Now, I've talked about this before. I'm not going to go into too much detail as to why it was a good move, but when I was putting this together and thinking about it, it was like, what makes this move so great for the Sacramento Kings? And I think it fits all three time tiers, I call them: the past, the present, and the future. this move addresses in a positive way all three of those time tiers. We start with the past, of course, which was the Kings trading Tyrese Halliburton for Domantas Sabonis, and essentially not just trading away a great player in Tyrese, who of course made the All-Star team this year, is really, really good for the Indiana Pacers. He's probably going to have a phenomenal career. It's definitely not the last All-Star game that he will make in his career. But trading away the contractual control over him as a rookie or a young player that you drafted for a player in Domantas Sabonis that in 2.5 seasons at the time would become a unrestricted free agent and could choose to leave Sacramento if it didn't work out, and then you're left with nothing. Well, that's completely put to bed, right? No longer any concern about that. Even with the success of Tyrese Halliburton and the Indiana Pacers going forward, it might bother you a little bit or make you sad a little bit to see Tyrese succeed outside of Sacramento. But at this point, there's not really much that can happen for the Kings to look back at this trade and go, it was a complete disaster, it was a complete failure. Sabonis leaving would have made it a disaster. He's not leaving now. He's under contract. The Kings have secured that. So that's the past. The present, or rather the present. You extended an all-NBA center and an NBA All-Star, multi-time NBA All-Star. You extended them. You had them agree to return to play for you right now and enter into, again, that Monte McNair championship window right now. The Kings can hit the ground running knowing right now they have secured one of the best big men in the league. Even if he had a rough playoff series against the Golden State Warriors, that does not change the fact that he is absolutely one of the best bigs in the league, an all-NBA center for a reason. The Kings are in a great position going forward to actually truly compete for a championship because Domantas Sabonis is here right now and they can start to make the building blocks necessary towards true championship contention. So that's the present. Now, the future is twofold, right? The one half of the future is the Kings' starting five is secured for the next 3 years, at least 3 years minimum. You have De'Aaron Fox, who has 3 years left on his deal. You have Domantas Sabonis, who's going to be here for the next 5 years. I think it's 5 years. You have Harrison Barnes under contract for the next 3 years. Kevin Huerter under contract for the next 3 years. And Keegan Murray with the team options, which they're going to exercise, under contract for the Sacramento Kings over the next 3 years. This Kings starting five, if it truly becomes a championship contending starting five, which I know you have skepticism with that, or you might have skepticism with that based off of Harrison Barnes and his fit in the starting lineup, or maybe even Kevin Huerter and his fit in the starting lineup. Regardless, if this starting five can truly become championship contenders, you have them under control together for the next 3 years, unless you choose to move on from one or move on from a couple of them or make another move elsewhere. That's part of it. The other part of it is, and I've talked about this before, I talked about this recently, I think earlier this week, when I was talking about the significance of Malik Monk this year and how important he is for the Kings going forward. Malik Monk is one of, I think Kessler Edwards is the other one right now, 2 players that expire at the end of the season. Their contract expires at the end of the year. Now that you have Domantas Sabonis secured, which if he did not get this, if the Kings did not get this deal done this offseason, I mean, their sole focus and their number one priority plus 2 and 3 and 4, their top 4 priorities would have really been bring Domantas Sabonis back, do what we need to do to get him not to leave in free agency and to choose to stay with the Sacramento Kings next offseason. They've already secured that, so now they can turn their attention to Malik Monk. And even if you're in the crowd of, I don't want the Kings to continue to just run this group back, I think they need to still improve, I hope you don't look at Malik Monk as a piece that they should improve upon. I mean, we've had one good season of context. Hopefully Malik has another good season of context. I don't expect him to have a bad year this year, but I expect for what Malik Monk's role is as the 6th man for this Kings team, that Energizer Bunny off the bench, plus that facilitator and second primary ball handler. Like, Malik is perfect for what this Kings team needs. So Sacramento is going to go into an offseason where bringing Malik back is going to be a top priority of theirs, if not the top priority. And I share with you my prediction. I firmly, truly believe that the Sacramento Kings are going to have to really outbid a couple of other teams minimum that are going to want the services of Malik Monk. Just like Josh Hart was a hot commodity. I know he ended up choosing to stay with the New York Knicks, and good for them and good for him. I'm glad they were able to work that out. There are a lot of teams interested in Josh Hart this offseason. There are going to be a lot of interested parties in Malik Monk next offseason. I'm pretty confident about that. So that is the good move, the best move for so many reasons. Bringing back Domantas Sabonis, extending him, getting that secured was the absolute best move of the offseason for the Kings. So Matt, what is the worst move? Some of you might be excited by this because most of you think that I like everything that Monte McNair does, and I never think that Monte and the Kings have ever made a bad move in their life. Well, I don't necessarily think this is a bad move, but it's the worst or most questionable or my least favorite decision that the Sacramento Kings have made this offseason, and that is the decision to let Terrence Davis walk. It's not a massive deal. Terrence Davis was an inconsistent role player for the Sacramento Kings. He was both inconsistent in the production that he would provide and inconsistent in the playing time that he got. So losing Terrence Davis is not a colossal loss, and that's not an insult to say so. That's just the reality of the situation. But I felt that Terrence Davis had a really, really good season in terms of, I think he responded very, very well to Mike Brown. I think he really, really responded well to Brown. He spoke openly about how much he enjoyed playing for Mike Brown. We saw multiple occasions Mike pulling Terrence aside or pulling him out of games when he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing, only to give him another chance. And when Terrence would make the necessary adjustment, Mike would leave him out there or rely upon him or cheer for him or be the happiest guy on the sidelines. Like, Mike and Terrence Davis clearly worked very well together. Now, that didn't mean that Terrence turned into an absolute everyday rotational player. We make the joke about national TV TD, how good Terrence Davis was, especially in that Brooklyn Nets game, of course, when he had that 30 bomb. But I truly felt that Terrence both responded really well to Mike Brown in this Kings system, number one. And number two is, while at times he was inconsistent, I thought Terrence was always reliable to be at least an offensive threat in this offensive-heavy Sacramento Kings system. Defensively, I don't know how much further TD could have gone as a defender, and maybe that was the biggest reason why the Kings elected to move in a different direction. I believe the Chris Duarte trade was to bring someone in who essentially would fill the role that Terrence Davis could not or was not going to be able to the expectation of Mike Brown and this Kings team. I think Chris Duarte is Terrence Davis's replacement this offseason. I think that's why they made that move, because he can space the floor and shoot. Maybe not as prolific of a scorer as Terrence Davis is, but more sound and solid and should be more versatile of a defender. So maybe that's why the Sacramento Kings chose to make this decision. But I think Terrence Davis is a good player. I'm a little bit surprised. Last I checked, Terrence Davis has not been signed. He's still not on a team. He's still a free agent. I would be shocked going into training camp if Terrence Davis is not on a roster does not get a training camp invite. I think Terrence Davis is going to be on somebody's roster at the start of next season. He's a good player. He's a solid player. I thought he made a lot of sense at times for what the Sacramento Kings were doing, and he had a lot of really good moments last year that helped the Sacramento Kings win games and where the Kings relied upon him a little bit. So letting Terrence Davis walk is a decision I understand, but out of all of the moves the Kings have made this offseason, that is my worst or that is my least favorite to this point. So let me know how you're feeling about that. What is your favorite move or your best move, and what is your worst move that the Sacramento Kings have made this offseason and why? You can reach out to me at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter, email me mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, and leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. Sam Amick and Anthony Slater of The Athletic released an article today where they had a long conversation with Monte McNair where he addressed a lot of the decisions being made. I'm probably going to do a future podcast or a podcast later this week talking about more specific kind of quotes and Monte addressing different areas. But I wanted to sneak this quote in here, which is towards the very end of the article. And I wanted to make sure you heard this or realized or at least understood what Monte McNair was thinking here. He said, quote, "I think people always focus on this year. But for us, this summer was as much about setting up the next 3, 4, or 5 years as it was just how good we'll be this year." Monte's playing chess, not checkers, right? And he's thinking 2, 3, 4 years ahead. He's thinking about not just opening a championship window, but stepping through that window and being able to continuously compete and be in that window and hopefully be in a position where you can become a dynasty. I'm not saying the Kings are going to do that or they're on their way to doing that necessarily, but you want to put yourself in a position to not be a one-hit wonder championship team, right? You don't just want to win, celebrate, and fall off. Maybe like the Toronto Raptors did. A lot of that had to do with Kawhi Leonard going there for a year, winning, and walking away. But the Kings don't necessarily want to be in that position. Monty is thinking, let me build a core and have control of a core. Like I mentioned, he has all 5 of his starters under contract for at least the next 3 years. Let me build a core here that can be successful now and can continue to be successful and grow later to where if we win a championship, we're still together to win 2 and then win 3 and then win 4 and start to sound like LeBron James did with his famous not 5, not 6, not 7 quote when he joined the Miami Heat. So I thought that was a really good quote. It's an excellent article. Go and check it out on The Athletic right now. I'll reference this article and we'll do more about that article and talk a little bit more about some of the stuff in that article on a podcast later this week. But why am I not happy with Monte McNair right now? I'll share that with you in just a second. Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, take a swing at betting MLB on FanDuel, and you can get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. If you bet $20, you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. So you either get bonus bets on top of an already successful bet, or maybe that bet doesn't go so well. You have these bonus bets to make that money back and make more money on top of it. And encourages you to keep playing at FanDuel. And that's what FanDuel is all about. They don't just want to take your money or have you hit gold 1 or 2 times and then log off, cash out, and never play again. They want you to continue to enjoy FanDuel because much of sports betting is about enjoying and having fun and adding kind of an element of excitement or incentive into watching these games and following these games. That's $200 that you can spend betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run of any given game. And it's all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on the MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Of course, a great place to bet on the NFL and the NBA in season as well. Sign up today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to get $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. When we were kids and young adults, and maybe even now, we all have our heroes, right? The people that we idolize. And there's a saying, I don't know exactly how it goes, but you never want to meet your heroes, right? Or your heroes, you follow them long enough that at some point that hero will become a villain. Well, Kings general manager Monte McNair became a bit of a villain for me today. And those of you who think that I'm a shill for the organization and only praise Monte McNair for everything, here you go. I'm about to make you hopefully a little bit happy with this topic. Monte McNair apparently had some time on his hands today, so he basically threw out a, hey, Kings fans, anybody, you want to ask me questions on social media that are not basketball related? Go right ahead. And he was asked a bunch of things about like his tastes in food, his in-and-out order, all sorts of fun stuff. And of course, he was asked a little bit about movies. One fan doing the Lord's work asked for his opinion on Lord of the Rings, which, if you don't know, Lord of the Rings is my favorite movie series, trilogy, books, does not matter. Like, Lord of the Rings to me is biblical. I love Lord of the Rings so much. I'm just obsessed with that world. I'm obsessed with the fantasy element. I'm obsessed with J.R.R. Tolkien. Like, if you don't like Lord of the Rings, have a serious conversation with me about it, because it's my mission in life to convert you. I would put aside the podcasting to convert you into a Lord of the Rings fan. Not really, but I enjoy Lord of the Rings a lot and want everybody to enjoy it as much as I do, which might be impossible. But I think you know where I'm going here. Monty was asked, hey, what is your opinion on the Lord of the Rings series? And he said that he tried watching the first movie and fell asleep. And that's it. Never tried again. Man. You have someone that you like, someone that you appreciate, someone that you do as much as you possibly can to support and recognize for the value that they bring to an organization, all the great moves that they're making, and then they go and break your heart by saying things like, they only gave Lord of the Rings a chance once, fell asleep during the Fellowship of the Ring, which is just absurd to me. Like, that's your problem. If you're falling asleep during the Lord of the Rings, it's not because it's the Lord of the Rings' fault. It's because it's your fault. You should sleep more or do a better job of staying awake or drink a cup of coffee or something. That's on you. That's on you, Monty. That's not on the Lord of the Rings. You fell asleep. That's your fault. You do... Man. I have forgiveness in my heart. I do believe that if Monty were to give them another chance, that he would come around and realize the greatness that is the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the greatness that is the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, and the Return of the King. We don't even have to worry about the Hobbits, right? Like, I like the Hobbits just because it's Lord of the Rings stuff. It's Tolkien's world. But the Hobbit movies aren't good compared to the Lord of the Rings movies, right? Like, we can put all that aside. You don't have to watch the Hobbit movies, Monty, but you got to give the Lord of the Rings movies a try again. And that got me thinking, like, I had this great interaction this season with Kings head coach Mike Brown. He found out that I was a fan of Dungeons & Dragons. I had tweeted out something about it the night before a game. He asked me about it in the pregame press conference. It was like one of the top 10 moments of my life, truthfully. I hope Mike Brown's got to be. If he's a fan of Dungeons & Dragons, he's got to be a fan of Lord of the Rings, right? He has to be. So part of me like wants to ask Mike Brown, and I'm probably going to do this, I'm not going to lie to you, I'm probably going to do this on Kings Media Day if I get the opportunity. I want to know if Mike Brown has seen and likes the Lord of the Rings movies, but I don't think I'm prepared to have my heart shattered if he says he hasn't seen them or he has seen them and he doesn't like them. If he does that to me, I might have to leave and join a new team. Because if my general manager and my head coach, who are doing a great job finally bringing the Sacramento Kings back to a place of glory, if they smash my heart into pieces by telling me that they don't like Lord of the Rings or they don't watch Lord of the Rings, I don't know if I can take that. That's how fragile I am when it comes to Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth. So, Monty, give it another try. I know you're not watching. I hope you are. Give it another try. Watch Lord of the Rings. If you need someone to watch it with, I will do my best not to spoil it with dumb pieces of trivia that I've learned over the years of obsessing over those films and over those books. Watch The Lord of the Rings. Give it another try. That is your off-season. Things slow down now. You got nothing to do until training camp starts, right? Fill your other 2 roster spots, then take a siesta and go watch the Lord of the Rings movies. Watch each one at least twice. Watch the extended editions too, not just the theatrical editions. You have to watch the extended editions. All right, I'm getting off the soapbox. All of you have probably turned this podcast off by now. Back to the Kings. Speaking of the roster spot, the Kings, or I should say, the Utah Jazz. Wait, or was it the Oklahoma City Thunder? That's right. It was the Thunder because the Jazz traded Rudy Gay to the Oklahoma City Thunder as part of a trade earlier this offseason. The OKC Thunder have waived or are waiving Rudy Gay. So Rudy Gay is now a free agent. I really like the idea of the Kings using their final roster spot to bring in Rudy Gay. I have no idea how much he's going to cost. I think at this point he's probably like a vet minimum player. I don't even know if the Kings could afford that. I don't know their cap situation off the top of my head right now. But if the Kings could afford to bring in Rudy Gay, I put together a list. Was it yesterday? Yeah, it might have been yesterday. I put together a list of names that are like backup forwards or just give you forward depth and point guard depth. Rudy obviously doesn't handle the point guard spot. But if you want forward depth, someone who can come in and score, someone who's long defensively, yeah, we know. Rudy Gay's a good option. Now, last season he played 56 games for the Utah Jazz, averaged 5.2 points per game. His shooting percentage is not great. 38% from the field, 25% from three-point range. Did shoot 85% from the free throw line. He's always been a solid three-point shooter. 3 rebounds, 1 assist in 14 minutes a game. His shooting numbers should absolutely be better than that. I think his numbers, period, not necessarily points, but his rebounds and assists should be better than 3 and 1 in 14 minutes. I know he didn't have a very significant role or big role with the Utah Jazz. I also know they weren't that great of a basketball team. But I think Rudy Gay is better than these numbers that are put out there, but we're also talking about an end of the rotation guy. We're talking about not the Rudy Gay who was starting for 3 or 4 years with the Sacramento Kings earlier in his career. We're not talking about that Rudy Gay. He's not going to come in here and put 10, 15, 20 points on the board for the Kings. He might have that night every once in a while, but if Rudy Gay is coming to Sacramento, if the Kings bring him in, he's injury depth in case something happens to Keegan Murray, Harrison Barnes, and Sasha Vezenkov. Then maybe he gets some opportunity in there. He's a veteran. I don't know if he'd want to come back to Sacramento based off of how things ended and how things went with his time here, but I like Rudy Gay a lot, so I would not be opposed to the Kings giving Rudy Gay that roster spot. How do you feel about that? Let me know at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter, MattGeorgeSports@gmail.com if you want to email me, and if you're watching on YouTube, comment section down below. If any of you send me comments negatively about the Lord of the Rings, I'm blocking you on the spot, though. Sorry. Them's the rules. Want to mention, too, before we wrap up, I think Jordan Ford, if Jordan Ford doesn't get a two-way spot or the final roster spot here in Sacramento, I think some team is going to at least give him an opportunity. He's going to get a training camp invite no matter what. I personally would like to see Jordan Ford at minimum getting that two-way spot for Sacramento, although I've had conversations with people that think as a 25-year-old, like maybe he's too old for that spot and maybe you give that more to a younger raw prospect. I don't know who that prospect is. I just want to see Jordan Ford get his first NBA contract to some extent. So maybe he gets that this offseason. We'll have to wait and see with that. But the reason why I bring Jordan Ford up again is because he got a little love from three-time NBA Sixth Man of the Year Jamal Crawford, who was asked on social media a couple of days ago about who caught his attention. Let me make sure I get everything right here. He was asked who was, or does he have any Summer League standouts? And he only mentioned one name. He said, I really, really liked Jordan Ford. I thought that was really cool. Of course, Jordan Ford is a Folsom High School alumni here in the Sacramento area. Sacramento Kings are his hometown team. Played really well for the Stockton Kings last season, and then had a really, really good summer. Averaged 16 points per game in the Summer League, just the Vegas Summer League, not including the California Classic. Also averaged 5 assists per game. That's a slight improvement on the 14 points and 4 assists per game that he averaged with the Stockton Kings last year. Don't know how much that matters, but he played well in Summer League. I think he's worthy of a roster spot, and to get love like that as a journeyman player just trying to break your way into the league and find a spot in the league, to have someone to the level of Jamal Crawford, who, I mean, 3-time Sixth Man of the Year. If you don't remember Jamal Crawford playing, do yourself a favor and go onto YouTube or go somewhere and look up some mixtapes, because Jamal Crawford was a freaking bucket. He was so good. And, I mean, he could have been a starter, but that six-man role was absolutely perfect for him. So to get that love from a player of that caliber for Jordan Ford and to grab his attention, and for that to be the only name Jamal Crawford brought up in that question, I thought that was pretty cool. So great job, Jordan Ford. Excellent summer for him. In my opinion, he did basically all he could within realistic terms to draw the attention and potentially put himself in a position to get that first NBA contract. I hope he actually gets it, and I hope it's from the Sacramento Kings, either with this last roster spot or the two-way spot. We'll have to wait and see with that. Appreciate your support here of the Locked On Kings podcast, whether it's during the regular season, during the playoffs, preseason, the worst parts of the offseason, the driest parts of the offseason, like right now, where you're having to put up with a portion of the podcast being about Lord of the Rings and the Kings general manager's dislike of Lord of the Rings. I don't know if I should apologize or not, but I appreciate you for getting through it with me and for joining me here on the Locked On Kings podcast. As always, can't wait to have you join me on the next episode. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.